Welcome to Virtual Wednesdays. My name is Francesca D'Alessio, and I'm so glad you could join us tonight. Tonight, it is an honor to host Rue Bainbridge for an exclusive premiere of their latest performance film, Wintering, followed by a live Q&A with Claudia Schmuckli, our Curator of Contemporary Art and Programming. Rue Bainbridge, the duo of Gryphon Rue and Benton C. Bainbridge, exists in an intersection of expanded cinema and sonic art to generate electric calligraphy with a hacked game console. Please give a warm welcome to Rue Bainbridge and Claudia Schmuckli.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Claudia Schmuckli. I'm the Curator of Contemporary Art and Programming at the Fine Arts Museum in San Francisco. And it is my great pleasure to share this space with Gryphon and Benton tonight. We just saw the premiere of a new work called Wintering, and frankly, I'm having a hard time sort of pulling myself out of it. I just felt like I was transported to a different time and place, very different from the sunny afternoon in San Francisco. So let's try to go back into the piece because it was so amazing. Thank you, guys. I know you created this work under very particular circumstances. And maybe as a way to start, can we talk about the genesis of the piece? Particularities of the circumstances in which you created it.
I'd like to start. Thank you so much for having us, and it's a pleasure to speak with you, Claudia, and thanks to everybody who's already put things into the chat box on YouTube. The piece originated with this invitation from the de Young, so it was an opportunity to perform, and it was our first time getting together in person to jam and to perform in person in 1 year. It was an anniversary since our last performance at Roulette Intermedium in Brooklyn. So we were really thrilled to get together in person and work together on this piece. We thought we were going to occupy an abandoned restaurant in Tribeca in downtown Manhattan. We ended up occupying the mechanical room underneath the restaurant because it had heat. And this was over kind of the late winter in New York when it was really cold and wind was blowing into the space. So we had an opportunity to use this space. And we basically took a long weekend and probably produced about 3 hours of sound and image, and then decided to select a very small kind of smear of that jamming together alone in this basement with, I mean, we had electricity, but all you're seeing is light really from very selective spots, and then the projection onto a scrim, which is also the illumination that's moving around. So that is not a kind of a post-production, but the genesis of the piece, it originated with the de Young invitation, then it kind of grew from getting together and organically finding our way and bringing in everything that we had to bring since 1 year previous, 2020, when we'd last performed.
And of course, that wasn't just any year, right? So, I mean, for me, the title Wintering, obviously, it alludes to the time of the year that it was made, but it also has all these other resonances in the context of our, isolation during the pandemic. And, to what extent do all these feelings, this pent up energy that you couldn't really release over that year in public performance, like how did that really make itself felt for you, and how important was that for the particular creation of sound and image in this work?
Oh, it was such a joy to finally be able to get together again with Gryphon. The nature of our work is improvisational, and that's really all about seeing and hearing and being in the moment. And let's just say that we found that fairly difficult to do, like over Zoom. Hats off to all the many people who have done great work over Zoom, but for us, it proved to be very difficult to do our work for a year until we finally, felt safe enough to get together. So
and how was it for you to not have an audience in this particular instance? Because most of the time when you perform in front of a live audience. And I would imagine that there's also a lot of responsiveness to the energy in the room, to, the people who are present. How was it for you to work without that element?
I think it ended up being a lonelier piece. Oh, sorry, Gryphon.
Say it again, sorry, I couldn't hear.
I think it ended up being a lonelier piece. I mean, for me, it was the energy is that comes across that I was feeling is for a year. I think many of us have been feeling just a sense of loneliness, but we've been wintering and trying to focus on the things that bring us joy or make us feel whole. But, you know, it's been a lonely pursuit.
For me, I would say it's imagination and performing with the future audience and future people in mind. It would have been different if we had decided to go to the trouble of making an installation in a murky, dusty basement and just jamming together. It would have sounded differently. But I think that with this spectatorship or having the concentration on within the future project did influence how, I mean, speaking for myself, how I was actually playing and moving my body. It was similar. I mean, it's interesting performing for the camera and doing this type of work, which requires a lot of concentration in order to improvise. You know, I'm improvising all the sound, Benton is improvising all of the image, but they're feeding back and influencing one another through both our awareness of what's happening, of what we're seeing and hearing and feeling, but also the machines have a gate, so they're actually shifting based on the decisions that we're making on a smaller micro level. But it was a performance on an abstract level. Which is peculiar.
Yeah. And it has that quality too. I mean, it really comes through. I feel like there's this really slow build up and such tension that sort of comes in at the end that you really sort of need to release. I'm curious to hear you talk about the importance of this space that you occupy, simply because you refer to a switch of space at the beginning, that you were set to, you know, play in one circumstance, and then you moved to the basement because it was warm and it was heated. We as the viewer don't get any sense of space in this particular piece, right? So I just wonder, you know, how does that inform also the trajectory of the work?
Sonically, the space is captured in the recording, and it actually sounded great. It's a resonant space, and it sounded warm. It's a former bank, actually, and it was a restaurant prior to that, a bank, and so there's strange extrusions, and it's outfitted with different things architecturally that make an interesting sound. So we were basically in this resonant chamber and in a very immersive environment sonically. So I think that is one thing that was attractive about it. But space is at such a premium in New York City. I mean, we were very fortunate to be able to use that space. And I think that the specificity of this space was part of what fed into the concept.
Yeah, it would have been a very different piece if you actually had stuck to the original plan and played upstairs.
Actually, you're right, Claudia, because in that case, Gryphon, we would have had an audience, right? Because there were the storefront windows, so the passersby would have seen us. But actually down below in New York, you often have these like gratings of the access to the basements where people would like load in product and whatnot. And so we were always aware of the people above because there would always be this like clanging and clamoring and all the sounds of the plumbing and steam and whatnot above. So it was kind of like being underneath the world. Our audience didn't know we were there. They were up above us, stomping on our heads.
Yeah, basically. It was on Hudson and Chambers Street, so it's kind of a busy cross street. And the space is now called Drone. So it's a sort of an interesting part of Tribeca because people are trying to get to the West Side Highway and some people are just walking on the sidewalk, and there's a lot of noise rattling. Some of it made it into the recording, which I love. I didn't edit that part out, even though there's a lot of noise and clanking and pipes and water dripping into buckets.
Let's talk about the context of New York, since you spoke earlier about, obviously the importance of the early electronic music scene, uh, the presence of the mazurka, the kitchen, all these influences that you amalgamate and sort of, channel through your work. Can you speak a little bit about your history to this field and within the field, and how you feel that, you know, you're transcending maybe the historical moment into the contemporary?
Yeah, so for me, my introduction to art, early video art, was actually through public television. So, as a kid, I was exposed to a lot of the work of Nam June Pak, the Veselkas, and many other of the first generation or pioneers of video art. But significantly as well, I would add that there was sort of this like video art, analog animation vibe of a lot of television at that time, including on public television. The children's television workshop shows like Electric Company were made with these hand-done synthesizers. So, as far as what I take from that is I'm very much interested in that handmade quality and kind of continuing that tradition, which Stana at the Video History Conference in Syracuse in '98, she talked about how it was all about the signal. And so people have kind of been referring to this subset of video art as signal culture. People are interested in taking the signal and kind of dancing with it, if you will.
I mean, and that applies to Gryphon, to the sound elements that you're using, right? I mean, there's a vast variety of sources of sound that I can't even I couldn't all see what you were using in this particular performance, but I've seen it in others. Maybe you can hint at some of the things that you were using. But also
I'm using a handsaw with a violin bow, which is shrouded in darkness, actually, half the time. But some of the cameras do show that it's a saw for cutting wood, and that comes from a folk tradition. But I play it sometimes more like an electronic instrument to achieve a kind of a drone. You mentioned earlier electronic composers. We're actually proximity to the Dream House and Lamont Young and Theater of Eternal Music and that history, which is kind of interestingly parallel to some of the things that we're interested in. But I'm also using a synthesizer kind of on my right that I'm patching, and I have some electronics on the ground for the saw and for my voice. So that is pretty simple chain of things that can allow those acoustic sounds to repeat and to be, distorted in various ways and accentuated in different ways.
Yeah, and I also love how you really put the emphasis also on your hands and your faces as you are creating the calligraphy, as you're making the sounds. Is obviously a very important element to show this very hands-on component, the fact of this being in the making as we're watching it. I mean, can you talk a little more about that?
I love that. That speaks to, I think, where all of this is coming from and what we're bringing to it, and from our backgrounds, which are not obvious from watching us, but I think from where we place, what we privilege of showing the hand. I think the handcrafted quality of this work is of utmost importance. It's kind of soft touch rather than a high-tech approach, and using the scrim as well in front of us, which disappears and has this kind of illusory ability. Those things, I was interested in sleight of hand magic a lot as a teenager before music, and it's wild for me now thinking this is where I am at this point, and it's actually found a way from folk music, songwriting, magic, different interests to kind of weave their way into this rather than it being a kind of a spectacular, more tech kind of thing. I'm not a techie person, in fact, not that interested in the tech, but it's more of the craft, I think, that comes into it, and not losing something Meredith Monk talks a lot about is not losing the human hand, and her concern that the human hand is being lost in the digital age.
I would also say that, especially after the experience of this year, this is something that I feel we all are more connected to or desiring of, right? I mean, having sort of lived our lives over Zoom and in this very digitized realm, there's a general sort of need and desire to feel more connected. And I feel your work has done that before, obviously, but it seems particularly resonant in the moment and tapping into that shared sort of need. So you just said you're not a techie. What about you, Ben?
I'm a techie.
Benton's guilty.
The way I would put it is I'm a techie in the sense that I'm a good beta tester because I do everything wrong. Every mistake that can be made, I'm probably making it. During the editing of this video, I actually managed to spill a coffee on the laptop that I was using, so I had to get another one. But
Another coffee.
Another coffee, yeah, exactly. Cheers. But my father was an engineer. My mom is an artist, and his father was an artist as well. And so I think he was a little like, oh no, here we go again. When I said, Dad, I want to go to art school, and be an artist. But for just to do what I am doing, I sort of have to figure out some basic engineering. So I'm an amateur, but a very enthusiastic learner.
Are you an early adopter?
I'm an early abandoner, Claudia.
Okay.
I stopped using smartphones before the iPhone. I did eventually go back, but I'm thinking of abandoning them again. I'm just really fed up with all that technology personally. Hence the hands-on
He's an
stuff.
old guard cyberpunk of sorts and knows all about he predicted the NFT boom, and you'll hear a lot more from Benton in terms of how our new world works. But he's a modest fella and we love him for it.
Well, let me ask you this. Now that you have created a work of art like this, sort of under these circumstances, do you feel that it will change how you work together in the future? Do you feel that now that you've sort of overcome that hump of not playing together for a year because you had this occasion, you feel your mode of collaboration will change or expand?
Well, Gryphon, we certainly did change up our working method in the middle of lockdown for I'll Wear a Mask for You. That pushed us in a new direction, right?
Well, so we tried something that was specifically for the streaming medium, really meant to be experienced only through streaming. So it was kind of about streaming in this whole experience. So we've tried that. We made a half-hour piece, but I think it just felt so good to get back together, to work together. We can work remotely. We figured out that we can do a kind of Cage Cunningham approach of working blindly. And I have my process and Benton has his, and then we put it together and refine it a little bit. Where I feel very lucky to have Benton as a collaborator where we have that ability to work separately and then figure out even at a late juncture really what we're doing and then assemble something. But it's so much more fun to work in person and to do it,
Here, here.
you know, with real human bodies in space, even if it's just one other.
Yeah.
Or two, because sometimes we had someone who was also helping us film something. And that was, I mean, it's wild to not have that experience for so long and then to have that fleshy, you know, interaction suddenly.
Was it hard to edit? You said you had 3 hours of image and so why are you laughing, Benton? I mean,
Again,
you're down to an 11-minute piece. I'm curious what the decision-making processes are when you do that kind of work.
I laughed, Claudia, because here again, here's another circumstance where, you know, if something can be done wrong, I'm definitely capable of doing it.
It didn't feel like it.
Thank you. But, you know, we had multiple cameras set up, but for a variety of reasons, there were a lot of technical difficulties. And then, frankly, we have a whole system that Griff and I have developed over years of refining our staging and our performance setup. And then a couple of things went wrong, like a memory card got corrupted, and this, that, and the other thing, batteries didn't work, you name it. And I completely forgot, Gryphon, that we had one camera angle that was recorded from another camera we don't usually use. And long story short, at the very last minute, the piece changed quite a bit, wouldn't you say, Gryphon, when we added in
it
all these
honestly
other
so much
stuff.
of this, yeah, so much of this came together in the 11th hour of, you know, making these kinds of decisions. And I think that we have a tendency where all of that energy comes really toward the end, which I think is not uncommon for people who do this kind of thing, maybe in any practice, you know.
Yeah, I wouldn't see. I mean, to me, I mean, there was such a clear narrative arc in the work. I mean, at least as an unsuspecting viewer who hasn't witnessed the entire weekend of playing together, it seemed really tight and concise, and that's why I asked the question. I mean, as I said earlier, there's such a tension, and there's a dramaturgy, for me at least, sort of that carries through the work that is really intense and also a little bit anxiety inducing at the end. And then it sort of like ends with this moment of release, which is
thank you. That means we're doing our job. And it also hints at our decision making around having that glut of material. How do you really selectively go about including your favorite moments and kind of killing your darlings? So it was really about choosing something that felt mutually felt good for both of us, and had that kind of narrative really for the De Young, actually, because, you know, 11 minutes is a very short performance, but to really have a proper arc, maybe interestingly it works for the digital medium to have a short arc, but in person that would have been really different. That's more like an hour compressed into this 11-minute video. I mean, it wasn't an hour performance compressed to 11 minutes, actually. It was a very short performance we gave to the camera. And then we did a little bit of kind of rounding the edges. So you do see a small arc that we deliberately, after we were warmed up, we performed these very short pieces and then picked from a very short piece.
So how does a work like this sit in relation to Biome, for example, and Wormholes, which do not show you as performers, but where we're just witnessing the drawings and the sounds? I'm curious.
Benton, if you have something to add, so for me, those pieces are single channel videos that are extracted, and then made into pieces that can be viewed in theaters and or through streaming. So using the scrim meant that those drawings could have that kind of magic quality, like a Foo Fighter of light that's shifting around and changing this kind of chaotic form. And I think that there's many differences, but you do see a lot of the single channel light drawings in Wintering that are just the moments.
Yeah. I love how they're just
when
spilled out.
Yeah, it was kind of about divorcing from the bodies on stage suddenly, like a snap back to looking at the product of both sound and image coming, or rather our hands really coming together to create this effect, which then that is the thing that for Biome and Here Come the Wormholes, we would extract and then make into its own work without the scrim.
Yeah, it was I think it's very effective to oscillate back and forth. And talking about the drawing, there's actually a question in the chat. Somebody said, it's so interesting that the sound wave sometimes looks like words. And obviously you've talked about it like as calligraphy too. Like cursive in extreme haste. When you are performing together, do you know exactly what the light will look like? Do you attempt to create a visual language that can be interpreted as close to cursive?
Actually, Gryphon, you introduced me to the term asemic writing, which is writing that doesn't actually have established meaning, not actually from an alphabet, but is nonetheless suggestive of written language. So that is absolutely something that I'm thinking of as I'm drawing. This, by the way, is a synthesizer configuration of modules put together. And, with the answer is to the second part of the question, from my end, I would say, I know pretty well what I'm doing at this point, but each time though, like I end up kind of unlearning because I tend to change the configuration of the synthesizer several times before each performance that Gryphon and I do. So in part to kind of like keep me on my toes and to hopefully yield some surprises where I reach for something and I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize it would do that if you add these two things together. But broadly, there's, certainly to respond to what Gryphon is playing, at the very least, I feel like I need to be able to, increase the energy, density, tempo, and bring down that energy. But more substantially, I hope that there's I'm able to respond in some sort of abstract but meaningful way to what Gryphon is playing.
So, but there's a mutual responsiveness, right? I mean, do you take turns in terms of who takes the lead, or are you mostly guided by the sound? I'm curious about, obviously you're improvising, you're jamming, so there's sort of like an intuitive back and forth that's going on, but do you start out in a certain way that you have sort of a basic script, or how do you communicate during the performance?
It depends on the project. For this performance, the score for me was coming from the light drawings. So I'm actually interpreting the light drawings. And one of the reasons I love what Benton does with this calligraphy is, for me, it also is a kind of an abstract language. It's very open. So I can openly interpret that. And there is a history of open composition, of a collaboration between the performer and the composer. So that is in there, this kind of very open score. So his light drawings are a score that I can follow. Mm-hmm. And it is a language. It is a musical language. And but it's open enough where that you can put it all together in a subjective way to interpret when one of us is taking the lead, or if the drawings are leading me, or if it's a sound that surprised me, or perhaps a drawing that surprised Benton, which happens very often. Something happens, oh my God, how can I recreate that? Which is very difficult, if not impossible, to do when something we really like jumps out. So I think that the kind of linguistic quality of the drawings is bedrock of what we're doing, because it has that openness in that asemic kind of a way to interpretation, for my interpretation, for an audience interpretation. And it lets us improvise, and it still kind of feels groovy, and yet it feels kind of tight because we have a score that we're able to read.
There's one other question in the chat that goes back to space, which is, do you prefer or especially like to work in odd, unconventional places for sound and drawing? Is that part of the improv experience for you too? Or was that, or to expand on that, was that just sort of like, is that a result of circumstance or invitation or occasion?
We've had a history of being lucky enough to have residencies or temporary like project residencies in all kinds of unusual spaces. Right now I'm speaking to you from Andrew Freeman Home, which is this mansion in the Bronx that was built as an old folks home for the formerly wealthy. And now it's an arts center and community center here in the Bronx, close to Yankee Stadium and Bronx Museum. And that was actually, Gryphon was certainly one of our very earliest pieces.
Yeah, it may have been our first real recording in that gallery space at Andrew Freeman Home. And
I think you're right, yeah.
Kicked off some of the aesthetic choices around unusual spaces, for sure.
Do you have a dream space in which you would like to perform?
Well, I have to say, I would like, I love this experience, but man, by the end of it, like the one thing I didn't love was the dust, which is not good for technology.
The electronics.
Yeah, because sometimes it can be charged and like.
That's too. I was gonna suggest we play in an aquarium, and I'm not gonna, No, seriously.
We'll waterproof our equipment, Gryphon.
Submerged.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
I want to seriously answer the question though, because it's such a good question, and I think that musicians are often fighting very resonant spaces, but I love a good challenge. I mean, if we played personally, the stranger the better. I mean, a very acoustically specific space, a tanker maybe. The Intrepid on the Upper West Side, that would be great. We could do something in like a skate park, inside of one of those massive bowls, anything that has some kind of interesting reflection or really bizarre. Oh, I know, a drive-in, because then people could bring their cars and they could actually watch the drawings and have that experience. I think that would actually be very appropriate given this situation with the plague and all.
I agree. Maybe that's your next project.
Hey, we're ready.
Do you have already a plan to collaborate in the near future?
Yeah, we have a lot of work to do, and unless I'm forgetting something, I don't think we have an immediate gig, but
Not
we have so
one,
much
but we're
material.
doing some showing. We're showing Biome actually on a 700-foot long wall in Lafayette, Colorado, with LEAF, the Lafayette Electronic Arts Festival.
Oh wow!
I think that's in May, so it's going to be adapted to like this outdoor projection. Not sort of drive-in, but we still want the live drive-in performance. So if whoever has the drive-in opportunity out there, let us know. We're ready.
You should talk to the folks at Fort Mason here. They've been doing drive-ins during the pandemic.
Oh, cool.
I'm serious.
Great.
Drive-in art events. So
Fantastic.
maybe that's when we have this next conversation. What do you think?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
I forgot, I'm supposed to mention that I'm also giving a talk on Alexander Calder and sound in May for the Calder Picasso exhibition as another event. So tune into that and check it out if you're interested in Calder and experimental music, contemporary music, and the influence of the mobile on open form music. Then you should join us.
Thank you, Gryphon, and thank you, Benton, for joining us today. Again, I'm so thrilled we were able to premiere this work with you and talk a little bit about it. So take care.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to Rue Bainbridge and Claudia Schmuckli. That was wonderful. So excited to say that our museums are open. Frida Kahlo and Picasso Calder are now on view. Please come join us. We recommend booking your tickets in advance online at tickets.famsf.org. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we will see you next week.